This man bought 30 watermelons. I don't know why he would need such a thing, but this man bought 30 watermelons. And I realized then math became important to me. Remember how way back when you would look at problems like word problems and the guy was buying like 30 watermelons, and that doesn't make sense because no one really buys 30 watermelons for any real reason? Well, we're going to be talking about word problems today, so I figured I'd at least make you a little nostalgic. That's about all I got going for me. So when we talk about slope within word problems, we're talking about something known as rate of change. Now, rate of change is something as simple as something per something. Formats that you might be familiar with are things like miles per hour or meters per second, but it can be something as stupid as shirts per person or ounces of food per cat. As long as it's something per something, it's a rate of change. Now, the best way I can think of to explain this is to go look at some problems, because that really puts into context what we're talking about. So why don't we go do that? The first problem I want to look at today goes like this. A membership at Recplex costs $28 up front and $11 per month. Write an equation to determine the total cost, Y, in X months. So the first thing I want to do is I want to define my variables. Thankfully, they give us our variables and they give us what we mean, but let's define them anyways. It's good practice. So, I take my X, draw a little arrow. X is our number of months. So I'm just going to write number of months. Next variable I have is Y. And Y is our total cost. It tells us right here. So I'm just going to write total cost. Now I have enough information that I can write an equation to figure out how much it cost for whatever amount of months I decide. Since we're looking for the total cost, the first thing we're going to write down is the variable that represents total cost, or the total for everything. So we have Y equals. Next thing we want to look for is our rate of change, our something per something. I see here we have $11 per month. So I'm going to take that 11 and I'm going to write it down. Now it's $11 per month. Well, what represents the number of months? X. So I'm going to multiply $11 by the number of months. So it's going to be Y equals 11X. The last thing to look for is if there's any initial costs. And we do have one. It says it costs $28 up front. Well, that $28 isn't a recurring cost, so we don't have to multiply it by anything. But it does add to our total. So I'm just going to add 28 to the end. So we have our total cost, which is Y, equals the cost per month times the number of months plus 28. Because there's a $28 initial fee. And that's how you want to go about these. That's how you want to look at these right now. Is you want to say, okay, what are we trying to find? And what's my rate of change? And what am I multiplying my rate of change by? And are there any initial things? What's my starting point? Any initial cost could also be considered your starting point. So, total cost equals our rate of change times our number of months plus our initial cost. So the next problem we have here is one cell phone company charges $35 a month for service plus 50 cents per text. Write an equation to find the total cost Y if one sends X texts. So this is the point where you're going to pause the video, you're going to work this out, and then we'll come back and work through it together and see if you got it right. So I'll be back in like 2 seconds. So the first thing I need to do when I'm looking at a problem like this is I need to define my variables. Thankfully, they again gave us what the variables are. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to write down my x. And what is my x? Well, the x is the number of texts sent. So I'm going to write either number of texts or just text, so I know what it is. The next thing we're going to do is define my y variable. And y, they tell us, is total cost. So I'm just going to write total cost, just like I did the last time. So now we need to write the equation. We have everything that we need. And they're telling us to find the total cost. They're telling us to write an equation to find the total cost. So that's what I'm going to set my equation equal to, is total cost. Next thing I'm going to be looking for is the rate of change. Well, I see here that it's 50 cents per text. So the first thing I'm going to do is write down my 0.5 or 0.50. You could even do 1/2, whatever works for you. I'm going to use 0.5 in this case. So we now have our total cost, what we're trying to find, equals our rate of change. But what is our rate of change multiplied by? Well, it's 50 cents per text. So I'm going to multiply this 0.5 by x. Now I need to ask myself, is there any kind of initial cost? Is there any cost that's going to be there no matter what? Well, there is. The company charges $35 a month for service. So there's always going to be that constant 35 on the back, because we're only looking at 1 month here. We're only looking for 1 month. So we would only have to include that 35 one time. So we have total cost equals a rate of change times the number of texts that one has sent plus 35 just for the service. And that's how that would go. You would have your total cost, which is your y, equals 0.5 times x plus 35. Before we go for today, let's wrap up and talk about what we actually did throughout the entire course of this video. Today we looked at slope in word problems and how it changes into rate of change and what rate of change is. Rate of change is simply just something per something. Whether it's shirts per cat, meters per second, or miles per hour, it was something per something, and that is our rate of change. We took that information and we used it to write equations from word problems that we were given. In the process of doing that, we had a few different steps. Our first step was we defined our variables. We said what our variables were, what they mean, so we could keep track of them. Second thing we did was we determined our constant, our given constant, our starting point, what we're working from. Third thing we did was we found our rate of change, our something per something, and we plugged that in and multiplied it by x. The last thing we did was we wrote the equation given all that information that we had just found or created or decided upon. And that's everything we did today. Tomorrow, we're going to be looking at taking the form, what form that equation is in, and looking at it more in depth. I'll give you a hint. It's called slope-intercept form, and it's really useful later on. But you've been the students. I've been the teacher. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time.